And now, Legal Perspective with Nick Clekis.
The Charleston region consistently ranks among the most dangerous areas for cyclists and pedestrians. Now, with the weather warming up and more people hitting the streets, there is no better time to talk about safety and knowing your rights. Let's welcome back Nick Clekis, owner of Clekis Law Firm. Nick, thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So you hear that, cyclists and pedestrians always have the right of way. Is that true?
Yes and no. Bicyclists and other vehicles have the same rights as other vehicles, and they have to obey by the same laws. You can't ride your bike on a sidewalk, you can't run red lights, and there are some rules, for bicyclists that are important, which we talked about before we started airing, is that they have to stay as far to the right as practicable. And I didn't know what that word meant, but it's different than practical, because practical kind of means you kind of do what's easiest. This is practical to do. Well, practicable is a higher standard of care, and it means you have to stay as far to the right as possible to allow traffic to pass and whatever. But, with Charleston having narrow streets, and there's so many more people on non-powered vehicles, e-bikes, scooters, which are powered, bicycles, you're seeing all kinds of injuries. Dooring injuries now are like a big thing. People riding down the block, you open your door and they get clobbered. And so, who's at fault? It depends on the facts a lot of times.
And also something we were talking about before is that more often than not, actually the pedestrians and the cyclists are the ones that are found at fault, not the driver of the vehicle. Do you see that most cases when, an accident happens, that the cyclist, for example, is, not taking the precautions that they should, like you said, as far to the right as practicable? Is that usually the case?
For some reason, we find pedestrians and bicyclists to be found at fault more times than not, even if they're not. I don't know why, but it just seems that when the police arrive, they make a decision that the person wasn't doing what they were supposed to do. Now, obviously, if you're in a crosswalk, that's different. But when you're riding a bike, who's to say whether or not they were as far right as practicable, whether or not they veered at the last second. And then, the people that are driving the car always say, I didn't see them, they came out of nowhere. And so sometimes it does come down to the facts. Did they hit the side of the car, the front of the car, things like that.
And now, how does it change when it comes to a cyclist hitting a pothole or a broken part of the sidewalk? We touched on this a long time ago, but can you remind us? Yeah,
well, it kind of goes back to premise liability. Is it a state-maintained road? Is it a city-maintained road? Did they have notice? Is it something that was preventable? And so, we talked about the slate sidewalks in Charleston. Those things create a hazard. Potholes, sometimes they just pop up, and before the city knows it, somebody's injured.
And now, when it comes to a minor accident where maybe you don't feel hurt or there's no damage to your car, you don't report it, right? We're all guilty of doing that. But should you always report, even if it's minor?
If there's injuries, yes.
Okay.
If there's injuries, you really should, because if there's a vehicle involved and their insurance may come into play, you're going to have denials by the insurance company. You failed to report it. There's no damage to our vehicle. We weren't in the area. Had a case the other day, lady hit by a garbage truck. She didn't do anything for a couple weeks, and we ended up having to sue 3 garbage companies because we didn't know which one it was until we narrowed down who was on that route at that time. So yeah, immediacy is always important.
Better to be safe than sorry.
That's right.
And now really quick, so for cyclists, stay as far to the right as practicable. Is there anything else that cyclists and pedestrians need to know before hitting the streets this summer?
I think all the reasonable stuff, be aware of your surroundings, wear light clothing if you're traversing the streets at night. You can even put your flashlight on your phone if you're crossing the street to kind of give you a little bit of, reflection. Just kind of be careful. That's really the easiest advice I could give.
And if you're coming to Charleston, and you need to know that downtown, the cobblestone roads, so you need to be extra careful. But of course, if you're involved in an accident in South Carolina, call Clekis, 843-9000000. Clekis.com is where you can go. Nick, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having us.
We're back in 2 minutes.
This has been Legal Perspective with Nick Clekis.